Minerva. Today we are starting a brand new series looking at how to create a basic trouser block. This is one that I know a lot of you have been waiting for, and we are really excited to bring it to you today. Now, there are a lot of different types of trouser blocks that we could demo for you today. The one that we have picked and selected to show you is the one that we feel is the most versatile for you. So this is going to be the basic trouser block. This trouser block is fitted up at the waist, so it extends all the way up to the waist and then fits nice and snugly around the hips and then tapers down to the legs. So what you're going to end up with is a pair of trousers that just sort of slimline fit you really nicely. The block also has darts at the waist, so we've got some really nice fitting opportunities at that point there too. And because it's fitted all the way up to the natural waist, that gives you opportunity to lower the waistline should you want to in the future, down to your natural waistline, which is often how we wear trousers nowadays, unless you want the high-waisted trousers. As always with this series, we're going to be using metric measurements, so centimetres and millimetres rather than imperial. And what you're going to see on this demo is actually my body measurements being drawn out to create a beautiful trouser block. Now, obviously, the whole point of pattern drafting is that you are creating your own unique bespoke block. So you're going to be using the same methods and calculations, but you're going to be basing those on your body dimensions. So let's go and take a look at the critical dimensions that you need to have in order to be able to follow along today.
So our hip measurement is not where our hip bones are, it's actually lower than that, and it's the widest part around our body at this point. And that's simply because if you're making a garment, it obviously needs to fit over your widest bit, which is down here. So your hip measurement is usually taken at the bottom of where your zip of your trousers is or where your jeans is, somewhere around there. Now everybody has a different body shape, so yours might be a little bit higher, might be a bit lower, but just find the broadest bit around that whole circumference of your body at that point. Now, for the sake of this video, and you will also find this helpful at home, you can get just a loop of elastic and just pop it on so it goes over your head and over your hips. And this is going to act as a little marker for where your hip measurement has been taken. Wrap the tape measure around that widest bit where that marking of that elastic is. Just check that's running straight all the way around. And then check that you can run 2 fingers around that point there. Take that measurement and write it down. Once you've done your hip measurement and got that right, we're going to do our waist measurement. So I'd grab another piece of round elastic and pop that over your head, and let's find your waist. So our waist is often higher than where you think it is on your body. It's exactly where the kink of your body is, or the bend of your body is when you bend to one side. There's like a natural break in your body just underneath your rib cage at that point, in between your rib and your hips, which are way down here, but it's higher up than you think it might be. So bend to both sides until you can feel where that natural bend is at that point. Do that a few times to make sure you feel comfortable, get that right, and then put that piece of elastic around that area. So just fit it into the same place. So grab your tape measure and pop that around your body, following that line of where the elastic is. Breathe in, hand out, and just let that elastic work with the breathing so it's not pulling on you as you breathe. Okay, and then make sure that you can fit 2 fingers around that, in between your body and the tape measure. Take that measurement and write it down. Right, now the reason that we've done these 2 bits of elastic here and here is so that we can do our next dimension, which is our waist to our hips. So grab your tape measure, and what we want to do is to get a straight line from our waist to our hips. We don't want to be curving around and adding extra length through the curve. We just want a nice straight measurement. So standing up nice and straight, tape measure where your waist is, tape measure to where your hip line is, and that is coming out that for me. Okay, so make a note of that, pop it down. And then our final measurement that we want to take is waist to knee. So again, we're going to do a nice straight line, just let the tape measure sort of drop down. And at this point, you may need a hand from someone to be able to take that measurement and get that straight down to your knee. Okay, and once you've got that measurement, write it down.
In order to take the body rise, what we need to do is to sit down on a chair and take a measurement from our waist straight down to the chair. The final measurement is waist to floor, and you may well need someone to help you do this measurement. So take a measurement from your waist straight down to the floor and make sure you're not wearing any shoes at this point. So you're standing straight on the ground. The only other measurement you need is to know what your trouser bottom width is. So this one is just a generic measurement based on your UK body size. And there's a little chart on the screen here that tells you what trouser bottom width you need depending on your size. So make a note of that. Now, as you undertake the pattern drafting course with me, there are a number of little tools that you're going to need, so I'll talk you through those quickly now. All the tools will be linked in the video description, so don't worry if you miss anything, you can always purchase those from our website using the links below. You're going to need the following tools. A tape measure to measure your body, some elastic is always helpful just to have reference points across your body, around your waist and your hips as you measure yourself. Calculator is brilliant for when we're doing our calculations as we're actually pattern drafting, and then sellotape's always great for when we're adjusting the patterns later on. You're also going to need a pattern drafting ruler, and I also recommend getting some erasable colouring pens so that as you're making the adaptions and any changes that you need to your block, you can do them using a different colour pen, and something that's erasable is really helpful at that point too. You may also want to use dot and cross paper or squared pattern paper in order to ensure that all of your lines are at nice right angles. And once you've finished drafting out your block on paper, we're then going to cut it out of calico. So we have calico, a cutting mat, various cutting tools, and then you're going to see me using the carbon paper and tracing wheel in order to trace off where the darts are and any critical markings that we want to put onto our block. Okay, let's get started now. The first thing to do is to get your piece of paper and cut it to the length of your waist to floor with a bit of extra. So for me, that is 109 centimetres long, is sort of around and about how long my trousers are going to be. So I'm going to make sure my piece of paper is at least that long with extra to either end. To start off with, draw a line across the top of your sheet of paper. This is just going to be a nice little reference line for you. Annotate this to say it's your waistline. Next, take your waist to full measurement, whatever that measurement is, and then we're just going to draw a long line all the way down that is that length. So squaring off from the line that you've just drawn, find the centre of that line and then just square all the way down. Once you hit the bottom, then just square off to either side of that line. You can annotate the bottom line as the floor line because that is the dimension that we've done waist to floor. The next measurement we're going to use is the body rise measurement. So whatever your body rise is, I want you to mark a point along that centre line that is the distance of your body rise. For me, it is 26 centimetres, and for you, it will be something different. Then, at that point, then just square across. Next, we're going to draw our waist to hip, which for me is 21 centimetres. And we're going to draw that distance, the waist to hip, from the waist down that centre line and mark a point. Then just square that across. And this then becomes our hip line. We're next going to locate where the knee line is. So working from this crotch depth line all the way down to the floor line, take that measurement and whatever yours is, tap it into the calculator and then divide it by 2. Then minus 5 centimetres. Mark that distance along this line, offset from the crotch depth line. So for me, from the crotch depth, I'm going to work down 36.5 centimetres. square across. This then becomes our knee line. Okay, we're now going to start to do a little bit more detail in this area here, and we still need to draw a little bit more of our grid. So we're going to continue just to mark a few reference lines before we actually draw in the block line. Take your hip measurement, whatever that is, and divide it by 12. Then add 2 centimetres. Working along the crotch depth line, mark a point away from the centre trouser line along that line with whatever distance you've just calculated. For me, it's 10.5. Then just square up to the waistline. Next, take your hip measurement and divide it by 4. Add 0.5. And then working along the hip line, mark that distance away from this point here. So for me, it's 26 centimetres and offsetting. Next, take the hip measurement again, which for me is 102, and divide it by 16 this time. Add 1 centimetre. Then, working along this crotch line here, just mark that distance along this line. For me, it's 7.3. Working along the waistline up at the top, just mark a point that is 1 centimetre away from this line here, 1 centimetre towards the centre. Then join that point that you've just marked down to this point here. And this is actually going to be a block line, so you can draw it in a nice straight line. Next, what we're going to do is curve from this point around to that point we've just marked there. However, it's going to be helpful for us to mark a little help point as to where that kind of softness of that curve should come in. So working at this junction here, starting at that point, we want to mark a point that is 45 degrees from that point towards the side of the screen here. So to start off with, I'm just going to grab my pattern drafting ruler and just mark where the sort of end point of that, where that 45 degree line would go. Now if you're a UK size 18 or less, the distance we're going to draw is 3 centimetres. If you are a UK size 18 plus, you're going to want to draw an offset distance of 3.5. So whatever distance you need to draw from this point, mark a help point at that distance. For me, I'm going to mark it at 3 centimetres and just put a little X there. Next, using your pattern curve ruler as a guide, just try and find a nice soft curve which is going to cut through your help line and extend all the way down to that marker. Okay, next we're going to take our waist measurement, so tap that into your calculator and then just divide it by 4. Add 2 centimetres. Then working along the waistline, mark a point from here along the waistline that is that distance. For me, it's 20.5, for you, it'll be something different. We're now going to create our very first dart. So let's do that together now. This dart is just a generic dart, and for all of us, it will be the same width and depth. However, when you come to fit your trousers, you may want to extend this dart or widen it slightly, curve it, shorten it. There's a whole load of different things you can do to this dart. But in order to get us moving forward in the block, this dart is just going to be the same for everybody. The width of the dart is going to be 2 centimetres and the length is going to be 10. So, working along this centre line here, mark a point from the waist down that is 10 centimetres below the waist. The width is going to be 2 centimetres, so mark a point on either side of that centre line that is 1 centimetre to either side. Draw in those dart legs. Then continue to use your block line just to continue all the way along the waist from this front section here across to the dart, and then continue along to that point that we just marked along the waistline. Great, brilliant. We're going to move down to the bottom of the trousers now. So using your trouser bottom dimension, for me it's 22, for you it will be something else. Tap that into your calculator, divide it by 2, and then minus 0.5. Mark that distance along the floor line from that centre line. So for me, 10.5. Next, we want to work out what's going to happen to our knee line up here and where the kind of curve of the trouser leg needs to sit along the knee line. Whatever that distance was there, for me it was 10.5. I'm now going to add 1.3 centimetres. Again, if you're a UK size 18 or above, you're going to want to add 1.7 centimetres just to give you that extra ease in that area. So mark that offset from the centre line along the knee line. Pop your ruler between the waist and the hip line where that little marker is right there. Whatever that distance is, mark a point halfway along that line. Then mark a little help point 5 millimetres away from the block. Okay, wonderful. What we're going to do now is actually draw in our leg. So starting at the floor line, join your reference point on the floor line to your knee line. Then from your knee line up to your hip line. And then find a soft curve from the hip to the waist that just cuts through that little help line. Doesn't have to cut through exactly, but just use it as a little guide. Now, whatever that distance is between the centre line and the side of your leg there, just offset the same distance towards this side of the centre line. So for me, it was 10.5. And again, whatever distance it was from the centre line to the knee line here, mark that distance from the centre line the other way. And joining these 2 points with a straight line, mark the centre point along that line. I'm just going to mark a help point that is towards the centre now, and for all of us it's going to be the same. It's going to be 0.75 centimetres, and that's just going to help us with our curve. Okay, let's draw the bottom of the trouser leg in now, 1 point to the next, and then from the knee down to the floor we can draw that line in too. And then we just want to find a soft curve between that point and this point here, using this line as our little reference. So I'm just going to find a nice soft curve and draw that using my pattern drafting ruler. At this point, we're just going to label it just over here to say it's the front trouser piece, because we have to draw the back next. Now, our back trouser pattern piece is often just drawn straight onto the same piece of paper, and you can do that at home if you want to. For the purpose of this demo, what I'm actually going to do is to pop a piece of tracing paper over my block that I've drawn for my front and draw on my back trouser block leg using a different colour pen, just so it's a bit clearer for you on the screen above. Working along the crotch line, measure the distance from the centre to that reference point help line there and tap that into your calculator. Divide it by 4, and whatever that distance is, just mark it away from that help point to this side. Square up to the waistline. I'm using a green pen for this, just so it's different and you can see that this is my back leg marker point. Next, mark a point that's halfway along that line. Then mark a point that's 2 centimetres offset from that line along the waistline. And then mark a point that is 2 centimetres above the waistline at that point. Take your waist measurement, whatever that is, tap it into your calculator and divide it by 4 to get 1/4 of the waist measurement, and then add 4 centimetres to that distance. Now, whatever that distance is, we want to draw a line from that X point that we've just drawn there to the waistline, and it needs to be that distance. So for me, the distance I'm trying to get is 22.5. I want that to be hitting the waist. So this line along here should be 22.5 centimetres. Measure the distance on your block from this point here to that line there. Tap that into your calculator, divide it by 2, and then add 0.8 centimetres. That's just adding that ease in that we need. Working along the crotch depth line, mark a point that is that distance away from the front block here. Then mark a help point that is 0.5 centimetres away from that cross below the crotch depth line. Okay, we're going to join this point up here to that point along the green line there. And I'm just going to use a dash dot line for my back trouser block, just so it's really clearly differentiated from the front. We're going to draw another little help point, like we did for this one at the front. We're going to draw another one from here out. So first of all, I'm just going to grab my pattern drafting ruler and find where a 45-degree angle is. Now, if you're a UK size 18 and below, the distance of our helpline will be 4.25 centimetres. If you're a UK size 18 plus, the distance of our helpline will be 4.75 centimetres. So mark a help point at the appropriate distance, 45 degrees from this point here. Then find a curve to join all those points together. Tap your hip measurement into the calculator and divide it by 4. Then add 1.5 centimetres. Draw a line that is that distance along the hip line from this reference line here, and just mark it along the hip line here. We're now going to draw in the rest of our sort of references for our legs, now that we've got some of the top bits sorted. So let's go and do that next before we come back to the top to finish off the waist darts. Okay, mark a point along the floor line that's 1 centimetre away from the front line, and the same at the knee line, just offset a 1 centimetre offset at that point. Now we've got a couple of curves to draw at the top of our waist down to our hip and then back into our leg. So let's add some little help reference points for us to guide where those curves should sit on the block. Grab your ruler and place it between the waist and the hip help lines. Mark a point along that centre line and then draw a little help point 0.5 centimetre away like that. We're going to repeat that whole process with our hip line to our knee line. Mark a point that is halfway along that line, and then this time we're going to mark the help point 0.5 centimetres inwards towards the block. Brilliant. Let's draw in our leg line now using those reference points as a guide. Offset a point at 1 centimetre away from the original front block along the floor line and also along the knee line. Then working across from the knee line all the way up to the crotch depth line or just below it, mark a point that's halfway along that line, and then mark a help point towards the centre of the block at 1.25 centimetres. And that's just going to help you with the curve of the block at that point. Draw in your inner seam line for your back block using those points as a reference. Okay, let's move on now and do the darts to the waistline. We've got 2 darts to construct. Measure the distance along your waistline up at the top and then divide it by 3. Then divide this line into 3 equal parts. So working along those 2 little reference points there, just mark a point that's 1 centimetre to either side of those points. Then working on this one here to start off with, dash in a centre line that is 10 centimetres long for your dart. And then on the next one, draw a line that is 12 centimetres long from the centre of the dart. Next, draw in your dart legs. Repeat for the other dart. And then just finish by drawing in your block line along that waistline. Moving back down to the bottom of the block, the final thing we're going to do is just offset a point working along the centre line 1 centimetre below the floor line. And then we're just going to create a little curve and draw in our hemline of the back block using that 1 centimetre offset as a nice little guide for us. Now, this is an optional step, you don't have to do this. You can just draw it straight if you want to. finish by annotating the sideline up here just to say this is the back. So most trousers require a little bit of ease around the back crotch line, and this is simply to allow movement for you to sit down in your trousers, which is obviously essential. So as a rule of thumb, the tighter the trousers, the more ease you need to add in to the crotch. Now you can add 3.5 to 6 centimeters ease in at the back. I'm just going to add a generic amount so you can see the process with me today. So just cut your block along the hip line. Then cut along the other way towards the hip, leaving a pivot point at the side seam. Grab your ruler, and what we want to do at the hip line is we just want to push out, pivoting at this point, we just want to push the block out so until it is, let's say, 4 centimeters away from the original line. I'm then going to put a new piece of tracing paper over the original block so that I can then trace over the whole thing to have one continuous block rather than one that's kind of opened up and wedged out and all sorts. So let's trace over that again one more time. What we've got here is a bit of a funny shape going on, isn't it? So we've got our straight line coming down there, and all we need to do is just redraw in that curve to come up to this point. And actually really our reference point is this point here, isn't it? We drew a straight line from the waist down to there, and then we just want to continue it around to that point. So just drawing that new curve. And then just continue to trace the rest of the block all the way around until you have a nice continuous block that you can use to develop your pattern. So there you have it. We have drawn up our front and our back pattern piece using the basic trouser block. Next week, we're going to look at how to adapt that block to make a pattern, and then we're going to sew it together nicely and accurately to check for fit. Once we've sewn the garment together, we're then going to do a little mini series all about fitting your trouser block. After that, we're then going to look at how to adapt your basic block to create a few different types of trousers, which is really exciting. So please do come back and join me next week as we make our pattern pieces and as we sew up our block. Thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva. I'll see you next time.